Muy buenos días.
Good morning,
Por acompañarlos
and
en
thank you
el
for joining us in the launch of the 2020 Development in the Americas report. This year, it is entitled From Structure to Services, The Path to Better Infrastructure in Latin America and the Caribbean. The president of the IDB, Luis Alberto Moreno, will be talking to María Antonieta Alva, the Minister of Economy and Finance of Peru, and Irene Cañas, the executive president of the ICE Group in Costa Rica. First, we will hear from managers from the bank with opening remarks, and we will have the launch of the report by some of the authors. This seminar will take place in Spanish, but we do have interpretation into the other official languages of the bank. You can choose the language of choice on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. Please go ahead, Eric. Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. I'm very pleased to be able to be here as we launch the conclusions of the 2020 Development in the Americas report entitled, as was said, From Structure to Services, The Path to Better Infrastructure in Latin America and the Caribbean. As you know, this series has a long track record at the IDB. The first one was about economic progress, and that was published back in the 60s. In recent years, they've touched on international trade, public spending, education, savings, and early childhood. These publications are part of the IDB's DNA. They have been very successful over the years, and they have influenced the economic thinking in the region, and their findings have left an indelible stamp on the people in the region and our operations and projects. This year, our department coordinated this with the Infrastructure and Energy Division of the bank, and areas very diverse. Development institutions, KIC, climate change and sustainable development, IDB Invest, IDB Lab, and the different countries. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all very deeply, those of you who had some part in this, particularly the Ana Maria Rodriguez from Sectors and Knowledge, and to Agustina Guerre, the chief of that area, for his push and his enthusiasm. He was a great partner, and the other divisions of the bank for their leadership. Also to the authors, Eduardo Cavallo, Andrew Power, and others for their excellent work. Today, we have a complete project. We'll hear from Agustin and then from Eduardo, Andy, and Tomas. They will divide up the presentation, and then President Moreno will moderate a discussion with María Antonieta Alva, Peru's Minister of Economy and Finance, and Irene Cañas, Executive President of the ICE Group. First, I would like to provide some comments. This year, we're working in extraordinary circumstances. COVID-19 has impacted all of the aspects of our work, and this is a very timely report because it's focused on infrastructure, which is key for prosperity and development in the region. We want this to be one of the key pieces of our cooperation. This report talks deeply about access to infrastructure, quality of infrastructure in the region, and some regulatory frameworks that have allowed for advances. The content of the report and its arguments are more relevant today than ever for two main reasons. First, it is impossible to think about a way out of the pandemic without quality services. Hygiene, for example, is only possible if we have access to water and sanitation. We need energy to operate, and safe transportation will help to lower the rate of spread exponentially. And in the post-pandemic, we're going to need more and better investment in the sector. Quality infrastructure is one of those because it has a multiplier effect for creating a better future for the region. So now I will give the floor to Agustin Aguirre so that he can continue with our program. Agustin? Agustin, you have to unmute. I apologize. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be very brief here. I wanted to begin by commending the authors, those from inside the bank, those from outside the bank for this excellent report. It is a wealth of information and knowledge that we put to the service of the region. What's more, in the bank, we have great new researchers on infrastructure. For the first time in the bank, many departments were involved in the preparation of the report. So I wanted to extend praise and recognition to you. We're about to launch an agenda of research on these years and for the coming years. But this report is key and it's innovative. The report is looking at a future that's green, inclusive, one that we want to build where we interact with all different types of energies that have digital connection to each household on each corner, that there's abundant and cheap water available to all. And this will allow us to process tons of information in just fractions of a second. So if we look toward 2030, we look at what has been happening, we looked at what was good, we looked at what was bad, and we asked ourselves what might happen between 2020 and 2030 to arrive at that desired world. That's why this report, what we're doing is sketching out a reform agenda for the regulatory sector, for the public works sectors. I'm very proud to present this flagship report. That now we're all locked down in our homes and we're just seeing the world through our screens, thinking about the daily tragedy of so many Latin Americans are experiencing. So this is a window to a future that we all want to see happen. I will now give the floor to the authors so that they can present the report. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Agustin. My name is Eduardo Cavallo. I am one of the co-editors of the 2020 Development in the Americas report. I will begin the presentation, and then Andrew Powell and Tomas will take the presentation from there. On December 31st, 2019, we all raised our glasses and wished one another Happy New Year. Like every year, we hoped for the best for 2020, but something went wrong. Something unpredictable burst into our lives. The COVID-19 pandemic pushed us into a present based on the dystopias of film or novels, as if a dreaded future had materialized all of a sudden. The authors of the book being launched today on December 31st were wrapping up a 3-year study on the future of energy, water, and transportation. We looked at how they had evolved and we forecast scenarios to come up with a course of action. The future can take different shapes, some desirable and some not. The pandemic reinforced our findings. Beyond the unthinkable, the path for taking advantage of opportunities is predictable. What is clear is that when we are considering policies and the route infrastructure must take, we have to shift our focus. We have to stop thinking about structures alone, about concrete and steel, and start thinking above all about the services people and businesses are receiving. The current status of water, transportation, and energy services is the cumulative result of years prior. Nowadays, the region is better off than decades ago. In some ways, we've progressed. For example, access to electricity is nearly universal these days. Much work was done in the decade to connect rural communities to the electrical grid. Access to other services also improved. But very often, what we call access has unacceptable standards for many users. For example, 86% of the rural population has access to improved water, But improved water means that the spigot may be a 15-minute walk from home. If we consider in times of a pandemic how irrational it would be to cover that distance to be able to wash our hands when that is a vital hygienic action. With more demanding standards like having running water at home, rural access drops from 86 to 55%. What's more, the quality of basic utilities continues to be bad. This is something that becomes increasingly important as access grows. In the region, very often, power is cut off and water comes out murky and buses are overcrowded. What's worse is this is expensive. The electricity and water rates that we pay are the highest in all developing regions. Low-income families in our region spend 14% of their income on water, electricity, and transportation compared to 10% in the emerging Asian countries. Affordability is key because expensive services leaves out those who are most disadvantaged. For example, 40% of the poorest have to walk in order to cover their main trip of the day, while this percentage is 10% for the richest. This wouldn't be bad if they were choosing to walk, but it's very likely that that's not the case. Bad basic utilities worsen inequality in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is very serious. Low-income individuals receive worse services and often pay more. The services do not provide the same opportunities in many countries and cities. This aggravates inequity. Our present has been shaken up by the COVID-19 pandemic. But not just because of this. Natural disasters and climate change are affecting the basic supply of services. Our planet is getting warmer and it's reacting with symptoms that until recently were unknown. In 2014, a heat wave in Rio de Janeiro led to demand for electricity that broke records and led to massive blackouts. In 2019, Hurricane Dorian devastated part of the Bahamas. The airports of Grand Bahama and Marsh Harbor were left underwater, and also flooded roads placed barriers to rescue efforts. We would like to think that Hurricane Dorian was atypical. However, this is not the case. The evolution of natural disasters in our region indicate that their frequency has tripled since the 1970s, and the damage they've caused have multiplied by 14. Based on current trends, in 2040, 43% of the region will live in areas with water shortages. Infrastructure must adapt to these changes and be part of the fight against climate change. The digital revolution, which has transformed many sectors of the economy, also opens up new possibilities for water, energy, and transportation services. For example, electricity consumers can also generate electricity and store it on their own. They become what we call prosumers, that is, consumers and producers at the same time. However, few systems in the region are ready to handle prosumers. We need to take advantage of the best of this transformation. We need digitization to be an equalizing force and not aggravate inequity in the region. Digital connectivity will enable access and use of other services, and on its own, it will become one more utility. As such, we need to aspire to expanding it universally in the least time possible. It has to be affordable, but people need to have the digital literacy to be able to make the most of the opportunities of connection to digital infrastructure. Thank you. I wanted to emphasize that we are on the precipice of a technological revolution that is going to change the nature of services, energy, transportation, water. We have different paths. So we looked at different scenarios to forecast possible future scenarios and how to get there from the present. Energy is following two different trends: decentralization and the digitization of consumption. This is something unstoppable because of cost decreases. Energies can generate their own energy, and the number of homes with solar panels is growing. In 2018, the cost of storing energy in batteries was much less than in 2010. This will lead to great benefits, but as Eduardo said, it also presents some challenges. And we have to be very careful as we think about how we're going to manage the electrical grid and access to the market. Digitization is going to redefine the way that we consume power. It can give us cost-free, immediate, and automated responses. Things like machine learning can be adapted to optimize use of the grid, reducing costs of maintenance and investment. Where these variables meet is what can bring us to a desired future, but it can also lead us to a dystopian situation with those with higher incomes disconnect from the grid, but then the system loses financing and it loses this solidarity nature. To reach the desired future where electricity is renewable and prices are lower, to reach this, we have to have different policies. We have to rethink regulations to push for greater competition and different ways to finance these grids. Moving on to transportation, there are 4 converging trends that will transform the way we move: automation, connectivity, electrification, and shared use. Shared use is already a reality. In 2018, Uber was present in 230 cities in the region with 30 million users and 1 million drivers. These figures are higher than those in North America. The use of electric vehicles is also increasing as prices fall because of the cost of batteries. By 2025, electric vehicles will cost the same or less than gas-powered cars. The evolution of autonomous transportation is also moving forward, but a bit slower. Studies indicate that their use instead of personal vehicles will entail savings of $3,000 per year for average household in the regions, which accounts for 17% of annual income. This can bring great benefits and reverse some of the negative trends we're seeing currently. However, in recent years, motorization has increased quickly in the region, or 4 of the 10 cities with the most traffic congestion in the world. What's more, shared trip companies has led to a fall in the use of public transportation and more traffic. So one of the consequences of this is it expands sprawl and displaces families, low-income families, to more remote areas. We can avoid that future. We have to invest more in public transportation, improve its quality, charge for traffic, and improve land use regulations. We also have to encourage non-motorized transportation, like the use of bicycles. With intelligent policies, we can move toward a more attractive future with fewer accidents, less traffic, and cleaner air. The technological revolution can also have a positive impact on water and sanitation services. Because of inefficient processes, we are extracting more water than necessary. Losses because of leaks and cracks exceed 40% of water produced. Better regulations and the adoption of technology can help to reduce these losses, which cost $8 billion per year, which is half of what's invested on an annual basis in water and sanitation infrastructure in the region. The traditional model entailed building infrastructure and using energy to bring water to more remote households. But now with technology allows us to do this in a more integrated way and more intelligent way that recycles more water using green infrastructure and technology. With active policies that take into account the opportunities allowed by technology, we can have extraordinary improvements in these services. All of the scenarios Andy presented show predictable futures for services. To reach the favorable ones and avoid the unfavorable ones, we have to work decisively. One of the main purposes of this book is to change our focus. When we talk about water, sanitation, energy and transportation, specialists and policymakers are programmed to think about structure, concrete, steel. For example, in water treatment plants, drinking water and wastewater, in wire towers and building railroads. But doing this requires millions of dollars, and when they're completed, they are always recognized. That's understandable. But there's a great gap still out there, but we have to think about water and sanitation, energy, and transportation as services, because structures are just the beginning. What citizens receive when we turn on our faucets, when we switch on the light, or when we climb on a bus is a service. Users don't care how the road is built. We just want a good trip. It doesn't matter what year, what material. It's the pipes that bring the water to our home. What we want is our water to be drinkable, and we want the pressure to be acceptable each time we turn on the faucet. Of course, structures and services cannot be separated, and understanding these as separate compartments is like ignoring the symbiotic relationship between computer software and hardware. But right now, the infrastructure agenda is hardware has had all the attention. That's what we have to change. We have to look at services from the perspective of users, look at different questions, other relevant topics that have been relegated to the side, because services don't rely just on concrete or excavators. It's also about the efficiency with which companies provide services, the rates they set, maintenance, and increasingly the way consumers behave. These services or utilities will not improve on their own. In the past decade, we invested just 2.8% of GDP in per annum in infrastructure. That's half of emerging agency countries. Investment in infrastructure multiplies. Each additional dollar can generate $2 of GDP. This is especially critical when we think about post-COVID economic recovery. So there has to be more public investment, and it's going to be key to seek out private investment. Latin America and the Caribbean have to invest more. And the path is to find stakeholders with long-term capital. Just 5% of the portfolio of institutional investors, if we attract those, we can double private investment and bring it to 40 billion annually. And this is how we will, to get this, we will have to improve our financial instruments. Commercial banks can finance the initial stages, and then later it can be institutional investors. But besides investing more, we have to invest better. And to do this, we have a double task before us. First, we have to plan to select the best projects with the greatest economic impact, and they must be sustainable. And then we have to implement them well. This means invest in pre-investments and effectively provide oversight to reduce cost overruns and delays. We have to think about the efficiency of investment. For every dollar we invest, we lose 35 cents in poorly designed projects and in delays, and that's also due to corruption. It's also key to invest in maintenance. Our bias is to continue to build more, but in many cases, all we would have to do would be improve maintenance, and this would reduce the environmental impact of all new works. The best case scenarios in the future for services share something. They acknowledge climate change and they take action against it. They do it through mitigation, adaptation, and by supporting themselves in natural infrastructure. The path to follow is clear, but we have to embark on it immediately because the clock is ticking and it's running against us. We have to think about net zero carbon. We have to decarbonize the economy. And there are 4 different pillars of action to do this. We have to generate power through renewable sources. We have to do mass electrification of industrial activities and residential activities. We have to increase public transportation, non-motorized transportation, reforest, and restore ecosystems that can absorb high levels of carbon. We have to reduction of the costs of renewable energy have exceeded all forecasts. Prices continue to fall. Now it is cheaper to generate solar and wind energy in large wind farms than use hydrocarbons. And the advantage is we use the sun and wind, and this will help us to transition to the new economy. We also have to adapt infrastructure to make it resilient. This means extra investment, but it pays for itself. Building resilient structures, for example, by lifting roads costs on average about 5% more. That additional cost is offset with fewer maintenance and repair costs, and it avoids the economic impact of interrupting services. 5% of $1 million work is a lot of money. But if we compare that to the 35% that we lose when we make a poor investment, it's very little. In terms of software and the infrastructure agenda, there is much to do to achieve improvements in services that reach everyone. We have to work on efficiency and the management of service providers. Regulation is key for this, for good or for bad. In Latin America and the Caribbean, there are many examples of regulations that are not effective.
En nuestra región necesitamos el 25%.
For example, in our region, we need 25% more pilots for the same amount of flights as in the United States. This difference is obviously not justified for safety reasons, and it affects the productivity of airlines, which have to increase prices on their flights because of these regulations. There are other regulations that have to do with truck transportation. In many countries, trucks have to make the drive back empty, which has a negative impact on the environment and increased costs. Technology is changing the services market. Today, many services are provided by regulated monopolies, like in the implementation of regulation, having not had been the best, the price of the quality has not been enough. Digital revolution is creating new providers and greater competition and new interconnections that are doing away with limitations usually seen in services. In this dynamic reality, for example, who should regulate when transportation is electric and when cars are able to inject the over-generated energy back into the grid? With the reconfiguration of markets, we need to also reconfigure our regulation. More competition will help, but how can we make the most of technology disruptions? That is the challenge that we need to address if we want to improve the quality of services. This new era requires a new era of regulation as well. It is easy to look the other way when thinking about regulation and not necessarily give it the necessary attention, but it needs to be done because improving services can create major benefits for the economy and be a determining factor for developing Latin America and the Caribbean. In our publication, we show that with minor improvements in how efficient services are, for example, through increased digitalization, we can see growth that is 3.5% higher in GDP over the course of 10 years. That means injecting our economies with an additional $200 billion. Better services and more affordable services will be most beneficial to the poorest, because these families are the ones spending a larger portion of their income on transportation, energy, and water, and sanitation. But in order to have the most efficient services reaching the poorest, regulation is key. There cannot be improved rates overnight. Usually, service providers tend to be monopolies, and if they are left alone, they will have full access to the pot. Regulation needs to be effective, and they need to ensure that lower costs means lower prices for consumers, because without it, then the poorest are not going to benefit from it and growth will be lower. How effective regulation is therefore a key issue when thinking about inclusion and growth. These recommendations are all addressed in detail in the publication released today. The structures and services has data and analysis and information, and it also gives us a view of the landscape that can give us a broader view on these services. Right now, we're undergoing the COVID-19 pandemic, which was unforeseen. But we also see there are two predictable forces, which are climate change and technology revolution. With those in mind, we created scenarios in this book for water, energy, and transportation. Some of these challenges are daunting and dystopian, but others are full of opportunities. By looking at this panoramic view, we see that there are different routes to follow. We can have a path that takes us towards sustainable and quality services that are within everyone's reach, and that is where we want to head. On behalf of all of those of us who worked on the DIA 2020, we hope this book is fruitful and helpful for all of you. And of course, you have access to downloading this by going to this website, and you'll find more information there as well. President, you have the floor, sir. Thank you very much, Tomas. And hats off to you, to Eduardo, to Andy, and all of you have spearheaded this process. As both Eric and Agustin said, this is work that was supported by the entire bank, and so I just wanted to take this time to commend you, because this is a key topic when we think about growth and what's coming and what's ahead of us. Now, these different issues having to do with infrastructure is going to be the best way to make the most of that future. And so it is a privilege for me to be here with the Minister of the Economy and Finance in Peru, María Antonieta Alva, and also the CEO of the ICE, or the Costa Rican Electricity Institute Group, Irene Cañas. Let me first start with Minister María Antonieta, who is a star in Peru, and she has also had to do the hard work and take the lead during this very difficult time. And Peru, unlike the rest of the countries in Latin America, had a very well-established fiscal balance and has also led to important investment to contain the effects of the pandemic, which has hit Peru particularly hard. Minister, when you think about growth and you think about the strategy to come out of this crisis and what's happening in Peru in order to once again get growth and create jobs, what role does infrastructure play in your analysis? Especially as you think about other countries in Latin America who are investing in infrastructure, and I know Peru has been a leader in this sector. So your thoughts, Minister? Well, thank you for having me. Just wanted to share a few thoughts. Economically speaking, Peru has been one of the hardest hit countries in the region. And this is because we have taken the most severe measures, among the most severe measures for lockdown in the world. On March 6th, the decision was made given the infection rates that we're seeing, an R0 rate of over 3 points. And so we found that there were two structural issues in our economy and in our society, which led to this decision of locking down the country as severely as we did, which is, again, one of the most severe measures taken around the world. And this is what we saw was happening in April and in May, and now we're seeing that there is recovery underway. with improvement of over 40% in what we've seen in the last numbers. And in terms of the work ahead, we have set up 3 specific courses of action. One is to protect the poorest households, and we need to continue working on that because 70% of people in Peru work in the informal sector. We have also noticed that there are structural issues that have affected us and increased our vulnerability. During the pandemic, we saw that public transportation has been one of those major risks. It is one of the highest risk areas for infection. At one point, it was marketplaces. At another point, it was banks. And now, one of the biggest challenges has to do with public transportation. The second course of action has to do with creating jobs. We believe, by just looking at the National Bureau of Statistics and their numbers, that lockdowns have led to a lot or large impact on employment. And one, we want to look at infrastructure as a way to create jobs and also close gaps, and also turning to private investment, which is key for us in creating jobs and also to close a few gaps. I think there are a few gaps that we saw were highlighted by the pandemic, and it has to do with infrastructure as well. One side of it is public transportation, but we need to get on top of this and take on it head on, because public transportation and lacking public transportation can increase costs for the poorest families in rural areas. But right now, it also presents the infection risk. And in this new normal, we are going to see a lot of connectivity challenges. In Peru, there's been very little progress in terms of internet connection infrastructure. And so in this new normal, we are going to need people who have new tech abilities and skills and more collaboration with the public sector and the government and the private sector. And this is one of the issues that we need to address. As part of our recovery strategy with the IDB support, we're able to adopt a national infrastructure plan with 52 projects. It is 100,000 soles. And throughout the crisis, we have taken a number of steps in order to have everyone understand how urgent this plan is. And that's one of the targets, is to ensure that we start getting that work done for infrastructure. And we're currently starting to close the gap in health and education. And one of the ways that we're doing that is through the special projects. And we had the Pan American Games in Peru, which was a great way to get some of those partnerships going. We're trying to get similar partnerships happening with health care and education. And now with the current context, all of us in the region are seeing that there are conflicts with a few sectors. For example, what happens in the mining corridor, which is one of the strategic corridors in our economy, but also one that presents a lot of challenges because it leads to social conflict. One of the issues we're facing in Peru is that mining has been a source of a lot of income, but given the issues having to do with public investment, this high income has not led to improved living conditions for people. And so that is one of the key challenges, how to ensure growth and progress in Peru over the next few years. And so we need to ensure that that is progress that is coming from all activities, including extractive industries. We have a special project for the mining corridor and for other areas, 9 different jurisdictions in Peru, where we believe that we'll be able to quickly close gaps. In Peru, we need to be able to solve these social challenges that have to do with the private sector. And I believe that the key to doing this is closing infrastructure gaps. And so in Peru, I believe that we will be able to very quickly close these gaps if we address those different problem areas. Thank you very much, Minister. And so accelerating all of these different processes, digitalization and broadband access, and what you did, as you said, which was very impressive, having to do with the Pan American activities and staying on schedule and on budget, and replicating that for health and connectivity and in what's happening in mining. I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars in mining revenue that can help Peru move forward. That all sounds great. Now, let me turn over to Irene now. We've been talking about climate change and how much progress has been made in decarbonization in Costa Rica. It's all very admirable. As a matter of fact, this is what we say in our report. The future of power generation can be fully renewable, and Costa Rica is a leader in this regard. And we would love to hear a little bit more, Irene, from you about what you're doing in e-mobility and in also changing the way industrial operations are powered, and also what you're doing going forward. I know that in Costa Rica you say pura vida, and so welcome in pura vida. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much, President. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And the report felt very interesting and also very timely. In Costa Rica, we have made a lot of progress in terms of renewables over the last few years. There have been a number of cases where we've been able to have fully renewable sources of power generation for 90 days or 120 days. And in terms of the national decarbonization policy, it's now time to focus on other sectors, the ones that are the biggest contributors to our carbon footprint: transportation and industry. In transportation, the ICE has played an important role. We have decided to start to promote electric transportation. So what have we done? We have been working with the Ministry of the Environment and Energy and other power distributors in order to ensure that there is a charging grid throughout the entire country. That's the first step, making it easier for people, for companies who get electric vehicles can feel certain that they know where they'll be able to charge their cars, whether it's a slow charge or rapid charging throughout the entire country. We took another important step, and we did that through a loan with the IDB, and that is that we acquired 100 EVs. At ICE, we decided to push out internal combustion engine vehicles, 100 of these vehicles, to replace them with EVs. And these are vehicles that we wanted to brand, make sure that people saw that those cars that were out on the road were being powered from renewable energy and were all electric. When these 100 EVs were launched, we tried to find a way to help to debunk myths. And so we did something special with our launch. We chose a number of locations in the country, and live, we set up cameras to broadcast some trips from San Jose to a number of provinces throughout the country, in Guanacaste, in Limon, in Punta Arenas, and others. We also did a special kind of trip. I drove the president and the first lady in one of the electric vehicles from the ICE to the presidential palace. I drove, and along the way, we were broadcasting live, and we're asking questions and answering questions regarding electric transportation. And so it was a very enriching experience. And we also tried to make it feel a little bit more homey. We had a karaoke carpool too. The three of us started singing in the car. And what we saw was that it allowed for people to let their guard down and sort of start to really listen to what's happening about with this equipment and with these kinds of cars. We have also come to the different parent companies and some of the automakers. And this is because in Costa Rica, we believe that we've been able to do away with the myths, and we currently have a law that creates incentives. And these are tax incentives that has made it so that electric vehicles cost as much as a traditional vehicle, with one major difference. There are more savings you can get from having an EV on a month-to-month basis compared to the cost of gas that you would need in a gas-powered vehicle. And so that has increased interest, but in Costa Rica, the supply is fairly low. We don't have a lot of different models, and we don't have a lot of different makes. car. A lot of people believe that this is a very small market, and so that has been one of the barriers. We need to continue developing infrastructure and adding charging stations so that people can feel more comfortable. And after the pandemic, we hope that in Costa Rica, we can once again become an attractive destination for tourists. Historically, we have always been a tourist destination known for sustainability and for our renewable action in the area of energy. And we believe that this is even more reason for the rental cars provided in Costa Rica to be EVs. And so tourists should know that when they rent an electric vehicle, that they will have a place to charge their car no matter where they go in the country. This is what we've been working on with hotels and even with national parks, just to ensure that the infrastructure is in place. Now, turning to industry, we have been doing a great deal of work on different electric heaters and boilers, which has helped us to set rates that can help us move forward with decarbonization, having incentives for industry to make these decisions and to put aside a combustion engine and use an electric heating system. There's still more work to do, but in order to decarbonize the economy, we believe that there needs to be coordination between the public and private sectors and the different industries in our country. Thank you, Rene, very much. Minister, there's one issue that comes up in the report, and you saw it in the presentation we heard from Tomas, and it has to do with how to make spending more efficient. Obviously, an ongoing issue in Latin America, but we saw some of the inefficiencies when it came to infrastructure, and in many cases, it has to do with not having the best planning or choosing the best projects, and obviously implementation is part of this. At some point at the IDB, we also worked on this issue with Peru. But Minister, what do you see as a way to improve the investment cycle for infrastructure, which undoubtedly is something we'll have to face as we move forward because we have to do more with less given this situation, but also an understanding that this can have a multiplier effect for the economy. So, Minister, your thoughts? Well, I think there's one key aspect here, and it's one of the main pillars for us. Of course, the quality of public spending in general is one issue we face, but I believe that the road we have embarked on has been the right one. We have just adopted the National Infrastructure Plan, which was developed based on international practices for planning and prioritization. As you know, we're at 52 projects of about 100,000 million soles, or 100 billion soles, I should say. Now, this was part of a consensus-driven process. We listened to the private sector, we listened to other stakeholders, and it takes into account the different projects that are going to help Peru leapfrog when it comes to development. And so, having been part of that fully engaged process with stakeholders, that given into investors as well on talking about the priorities that the country should set for itself. And one of the key things for us as well, and believe this is true for other countries in the region as well, is that we have had to face corruption issues. Of course, we had the car wash scandal in Lava Jato, and one of the challenges in our country as well is to ensure that there is no corruption in our public finances. And so we need to continue to define these projects and to ensure that these components are in from the very first part of the design of each of these. And we need to ensure that these projects don't only hold up on the technical side, but also that they are moving the country forward. And so this was part of a consensus process that looked at oversight for each of these individual projects. And for us, this sends a strong signal that we are fighting corruption. Also, something else that we need is full transparency. As a country, we haven't necessarily prioritized as we should have disaster risk assessment and reduction. We had El Nino a couple of years ago, which had a strong impact on public services, and right now through the government projects and programs, we're able to start up a number of projects that had been interrupted by what happened. And in terms of infrastructure, we have been improving a number of our PPPs, and this is particularly important in public works. We're looking at our legal framework as it pertains to contract establishments and hiring. We have been introducing these G2G modalities and these other PMOs, and we believe that this is going to help us make our public spending more efficient, which is also going to improve our procurement system. Now, in spite of all of the different safeguards that are embedded into this, there has been incidents of corruption, and so that this is why we're taking a new look at all of it. And in a few months, we're going to submit a bill to overhaul how procurement is done. Thank you, Minister Irene. Turning over to you at ICE, you have made great progress in technology use and how you've used it to improve power generation and power use. You've also used AI to, for example, optimize grid maintenance. And we know that usually the loss that we see have to do with maintenance or with loss reduction and working directly with customers, and particularly how to educate customers so that they make better use of the energy they're getting. And I know that you've been combining this with a number of issues. I'm wondering if you can talk to us about the technology side of things. I know that it's really helped with BPO processes, and also know that there are a number of businesses you're working with that have very interesting models. Yes, we've actually been part of this transformation, shifting towards smart meters and smart grids for years now. COVID-19 definitely forced us to step on it and really get there faster and shift towards digitalization. It also pushed us to ensure that our grid is being managed more intelligently. It's incredible to think about how useful it has been now, given COVID, to be where we are, to have all the smart infrastructure and processes in place. We have been able to be more efficient in, for example, looking at where some of the interruptions have come in. It has given us more control over the loss of power, both for technical reasons and non-technical reasons. But maybe what isn't on your radar is the fact that one of the biggest benefits that we have had during the pandemic has been that through smart meters, we have been able to get a better understanding of what is happening in the households, what our customers are seeing. And so working together with other government agencies has been key in being able to also address the pandemic. Smart meters help us understand where our customers are and also understand what their income level is. And to be able to match that with our database, for example, with the Ministry of Education and with what the Ministry of Health has, and even looking at our Government Assistance Institute and what they have. And thanks to all of those sources, we have been able to focus our work so that we could reduce poverty and extreme poverty, because those are the folks who are most vulnerable given COVID-19. And so having started all of this work in implementing smart grids, all of that is paying off right now. And not only on the electricity side, but also what happens beyond electricity, how to address needs. and how to ensure that we have that connection with other sectors. We've run a number of different pilot projects, and we have done that with some of the sewer systems as well. Our smart meters are not only registering power use, but also water use. And so we have been able to see and look at how working with our sewer counterparts, how to provide better monitoring of what's happening and what's coming through the system. And so that investment is what needs to be boosted. And it needs to go beyond just the power sector. And so we're in a process of discovery right now. We're seeing what benefits can come from this transition that we have already started. And it also pushes us to move faster in installing this equipment throughout the entire country and having these smart meters connected to our smart grid. Thank you very much. I know that we have run out of time, but I wanted to thank you, Minister María Antonieta Alva, for taking the time to be with us. And of course, thank the CEO of the ICE Group, Irene Cañas, for being with us today as well. I just wanted to say that, as Thomas said, this report is available on the web, so you can see it and download it. I believe that this publication is going to help enrich the conversation that is going to lead to creating strategies for growth going forward. You can see the address here. You can go to this website. Once again, thank you, Minister, and thank you, Rene, very much. Good afternoon to you all, and congratulations to everyone involved.